I'll go ahead and call to order the April 22nd, 2021 meeting of City of Jackson Budget and Audit Committee. First thing we'll do is the approval of the minutes. I believe Sandy sent those out to us a couple of weeks ago. Does anybody have any corrections or additions to those? Hearing none, we'll take those as approved. Moving on to item 3, information. Mr. Arnold, could you run us through, we've been doing revenue reporting this year on a monthly basis, and so Mr. Arnold will present where we're at present, and I can pull that spreadsheet up for you.
Sure, just a quick report on local sales tax, state sales tax, and hotel taxes. We've been monitoring these throughout the year. These would be March year-to-date numbers through the month of March. As we head into the final quarter, these revenue sources continue to track well ahead of our budget. As it relates to local sales tax, with a quarter to go, we're currently at 97% of our annual budget, 89% of our annual budget for state sales tax, and we're actually at 130% of our budget already for hotel tax. So positive results continue as we enter the last quarter. We should receive our April sales tax check tomorrow. So.
Okay. That's excellent news. I know that we budgeted conservatively around these numbers last year, so to see them approaching or exceeding 100% with 3 months to go is a very positive indicator for the rebound that we've had in the future for next year.
I believe, if my memory is correct, through the month of March, we were tracking about 7.5% ahead of the prior fiscal year.
Okay.
So, on sales tax.
Excellent. Any question for Mr. Arnold on our revenue tracking? If not, we'll move on to item B. We've had some general discussions about the American Rescue Plan and specifically the local government distribution. I made some calls. I know we've been kind of trying to keep our fingers on the pulse of that as Treasury is working on distributing guidance on that. From some calls that I made this week to MTAS, the State Comptroller's Office, as well as to the Department of Treasury, it looks like that guidance could be hitting our inboxes sometime next week. April the 26th is kind of a tentative date on that. That remains to be seen, but that's a key component to our budgeting for this year, and it's kind of put us in somewhat of a holding pattern, specifically on our capital budgeting, but also in some other areas. I'd like us to do, Mr. Arnold, to kind of run through an exercise between now and next week. I've done a little bit of some back of napkin calculations on where we could be as far as our lost revenue. That's one of the items that the American Rescue Plan, at least in the general guidance that was in the Act, will allow us to recoup. And so I've done a little bit of that for FY 20 and 21, but I don't have an exact figure on that. But that may be an exercise that we want to do over the coming week to see exactly what kind of revenues we could potentially recoup next year with those dollars. I know there's also some language in there about infrastructure improvements. We've had some general conversations about that, but until that guidance comes out with specificity on what we can spend that on, we're kind of, as I said, in a holding pattern. You know, I believe, and maybe the mayor could speak to this, but we're looking at getting that maybe, I believe it was May the 12th. Am I right on that?
Yeah, so they said that we roughly 60 days from the inaction of the legislation, which the president signed on March 12th. And so that'll be the first installment. It'll be 2 installments, and the next one will be give or take a year later. So 7 1/4 will be the first installment, and then another 7.25 next year.
Okay. So I mean, that's some significant dollars that are coming our way, and I know that even that number, we got some preliminary numbers on that. So we could, that could go up or down based off of some of the things I've been reading. Is there may be some communities that aren't that may get more or less as well. So we'll continue to track with that, but we should get that distribution amount and some guidance on that hopefully next week, and that can help us moving forward. Any questions on that? I just think we should take some preliminary steps to maybe do some figuring on what maybe our options could be as we approach getting that, because we're going to have a short turnaround between next week and the council meeting next month and some other budget discussions that we're going to be having. If not, we'll move on to the state infrastructure grant. As some of you may remember, last year the governor had, I believe it was a $200 million budget for distribution to municipalities to help with infrastructure. Last year, that was the total of our capital budget, and we allocated a little over $1.5 million towards our street resurfacing program. That was budgeted again this year. We've seen some emails come out from the Tennessee Municipal League encouraging elected officials and others to contact the state legislature to make sure that that's included again. So I would encourage everyone to give your state legislators a ring and just tell them we need that money. It's from my understanding kind of become a questionable thing at this point. So if you wouldn't mind just sending a quick email to those guys and telling them that we need that, and it's specifically for infrastructure here in Jackson. Anything to add to that, Mayor?
Yeah, I think right now the governor has indicated that those disbursements, which were dispersed to local governments last year in July, will be held until January, awaiting the guidance and the usage of American Rescue Plan. And so for those of you not familiar with American Rescue Plan, populations of local governments over 50,000 are getting direct disbursements from the federal government. Every other local government is going to have to go, with populations less than 50,000, has to go through the state disbursement. And so those guidance will go to the state and to the local governments there. So I think that's part of what they're waiting on, to see what that guidance for their disbursement is to the local governments. And so the question does not come from the governor's office. The question has come from some legislators on, do they want to allocate or approve the governor's $200 million for local governments in next year's budget, and he's agreed to hold off on the disbursement of that until they can decide. So, yeah, email your legislators.
We've gotten some specifically back on the American Rescue Plan. We've received some preliminary guidance from the comptroller. I don't want to leave this out on the way that we need to account for that. I think Mr. Arnold, I think we'll keep that segregated from all the rest of the funds and spend that in a similar way that we did, or track that in a similar way that we did with the CARES Act funding, as my understanding. I saw a memo yesterday about making sure that we had all the DUNS number and the SAM number and all that set up.
I don't know
to
why.
receive that.
Because the Treasury sent that out like 3 weeks ago. So I don't know if they're just now catching up to send that out, but that's been the Treasury's guidance for a while now. So we're prepared for that.
Okay, excellent.
We're ready. We confirmed our enrollment in the SAM system and our DUNS number. So.
Okay, excellent. Any other question on the state infrastructure or the American Rescue Plan? If not, we'll move on to item 4 of our business. As you're aware, we've started our FY22 budget calendar earlier this year, and we've had a pair of budget hearings over the last week or two. And I think that was well received amongst the council members who were able to attend that. That helped relieve the marathon session and help bring those council members up to speed on what specifically some of the departments were requesting, and what some of the needs were. I believe at present we finished yesterday, or what day are we? We're on Thursday. We finished Tuesday with our second budget hearing, where we heard from the engineering department and some other departments that we had laid out and specified as being contributors to some of the goals that the council had set out back in January. And then before that, on Thursday, we had met with our public safety and the NED on some requests specifically from the fire department and our call distribution center for pay increases. And so, Mr. Arnold, if you wouldn't mind just kind of running us through at a high level on where we are on our present budget, and kind of the steps we'll be taking over the next couple of weeks to kind of take a pin back to this after we've had the proposals reviewed.
Sure, I'll be happy to. Process-wise, as Paul described, we did start our budget process back in January, soliciting input from department heads. The city council did participate in a planning / priority setting session that was facilitated by MTAS, which was helpful. We've been working to this point to compile the results of that work that's been going on since January. The work continues. It's certainly a fluid process and continues to be a work in process. Paul mentioned the 2 budget hearings that have taken place last week or so. We have the budget committee meeting today. I know we will be scheduled for at least one, possibly another budget committee meeting during the month of May. We would anticipate the proposed budget ordinance for FY22 to be on the agenda for the June 1st council meeting. That would require a second reading at some point subsequent to that, and we would need to have the budget approved and delivered to the comptroller's office by June 30th. So that's kind of process-wise. In terms of the status of sort of where we are right now, just a general overview or some general comments about the budget. As I mentioned at one of the budget hearings last week, I think it's helpful for all of us to kind of have look at the budget in kind of an historical context. So if you go back to FY19, that was the last year of the previous administration. The city did complete that year with a what I would pretty much call or describe as a break-even situation, a very small surplus. We inherited the FY20 budget, if you will, from the council that approved that from the prior administration. The FY20 year was certainly a year of a lot of changes, focuses on new priorities, a lot of changes, and certainly the last quarter of the FY20 year, we begin to see the impact of the COVID pandemic, some in that last quarter of that year. We did manage to grow the general fund surplus over the FY20 year up to about $2 million or so. In FY21, the year that we're in right now, as we all know, has certainly been a year that's been heavily impacted by the COVID pandemic, both in terms of the impact of public health initiatives to protect our community, but also in terms of how the city's operated in response to an uncertain financial future. So the good news is, as we have shared throughout this year and earlier in this meeting, most of our large revenue sources have performed better than we had assumed in the budget. For instance, we've not experienced that I can quantify any real negative impact from COVID on property tax collections, as an example. And as you know, our sales tax and hotel motel tax revenues tracked above budget this year. We have had some city revenue sources, particularly those that are related to parks and recreation and public facilities, building fees. Some of those have tracked flat from the prior year and down slightly below budget, but on balance, revenues have been strong this year. And at the same time, in response to public health issues and financial concerns, the city has operated this year with a lower cost structure. So when you combine that with the higher revenues, we'll see how we do this last quarter, but everything now would suggest that the general fund is on track to complete this year with a surplus and probably grow the fund balance and the surplus from the prior year. And then when you think about next year, hopefully post COVID impact from a material standpoint anyway, you see a lot of change in next year's proposed budget. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about revenues in a second, but at least at this point, based on the information that we've had to work with and the need for this committee and the council and others to have input on our revenue projections, we've currently got next year's revenues budgeted flat for FY22, subject to review and some decisions that we'll make in response to some of the information that we're gathering about state shared revenue projections and so forth. So revenues projected flat currently for the next year. And at this time, expenses are, as the city reopens, if you will, and as the city kind of gears back up to hopefully a post-COVID impact year, expenses in the general fund are projected to increase right now. Salaries were mentioned earlier in the meeting. Salaries are projected to go up. Combination of some increase for certain departments in terms of their compensation, but the progression or step raises that we incur each year as employees progress in their tenure with the city, some new positions, that type of thing. On the benefit side, we are looking at an increase in the cost of our health plan next year as well. The funding percentage for TCRS is up slightly from what it's been this past year. And there's concerns about increasing fuel costs, utility costs, another couple of categories where we're seeing projected increase. And finally, the city included in next year's budget is a request to fund our technology platform for core financial packages. So those are some of the areas where we have increases in next year's budget in the general fund. Solid waste fund next year, we will implement a recently approved new service contract for solid waste August 1st. So we're working through that impact as well. And we're ensuring this next year in the solid waste fund that the debt service related to previous debt that was issued for the benefit of the solid waste fund, that debt service is being carried in the solid waste fund budget, as well as our capital request for next year as well. On the debt service fund, this next year, there is just a small increase in our annual debt service requirements for debt that existed prior to the fiscal year we're in now. And of course, as you know, over the course of this year, through a lease purchase agreement for the fire department and a capital outlay note for the police department, we've been able to address their equipment needs in terms of fire apparatus and vehicles. Plus, we're anticipating at some point next year the lease expense related to the opening of the new Madison High School. So we've got all that accounted for in the debt service fund for next year. And as Paul mentioned on the capital outlay fund, or the mayor mentioned, we've identified priority items sort of depending on the guidance and funding that we might receive from the American Rescue Plan and or the state grant that Paul described earlier. So we've kind of got what I would describe maybe as two different options or two different scenarios on the capital budget depending on the funding. So that's sort of just a quick overview of process and where we are today.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. I know that was a lot. Is there any questions on that? You know, as Mr. Arnold's stated, what we're looking at present are those revenues and trying to judge those. We spent some significant time last year kind of going into the pandemic, putting a lot of thought into those projections to make sure that we were budgeting appropriately. We'll be doing the same thing on that this year. We got, I think this morning or yesterday, we received some information from MTAS based off our state shared revenue. It looks like most of those categories, looks like most of those categories are increasing. I can pull that up real quick. Here we go. Looks like most of those categories are increasing on the state's projections, 2% here, if not flat, from what we estimated last year and their initial estimate this year. So it looks like a couple of dollars per capita that we could potentially receive from our state shared revenue. But we'll continue. I don't see Lori on here. Is Lori on here? I spoke with her a little bit yesterday about, and I know Mr. Arnold's been in conversations with her as well on where our hotel motel tax projections are. That's one of the areas that we, as we talked about in our information update, that's one of the areas we've exceeded those projections last year, and we hope to really get back to normal on. But we'll be in contact with CEDC on that to make sure that we're in line with their projections as well. So there's still a lot of work to do on our budget. Go back to my agenda. We'll continue to work through this, and I think we'll make a lot of headway over the next 2 weeks as we get information in on the American Rescue Plan, and we start to finalize, you know, what we're going to look like. As you saw there, it looks like we could have a surplus in our general fund balance for this year, which would be excellent and really continue to improve upon the financial picture of the city. And so we just need to have some discussions in the coming weeks about if we look to potentially use some of that surplus for other items and how we could use the American Rescue Plan moving forward. I think Mr. Arnold covered a lot of what we were talking about, specifically on item 4, our capital planning and funding options. As he stated, the mayor's produced kind of 2 scenarios for our capital budget. One is a bare bones budget that really funds kind of our necessities, and the other is a more expansive budget if we can apply some of those American Rescue funds towards that. Any questions for Mr. Arnold, myself, on where we're headed on the budget calendar?
Paul, the only comment I might add that I don't believe that I mentioned as it relates to revenue projections, we have taken a preliminary look at property assessed values and how that might impact our property tax collections next year. And we need to monitor that a few more weeks because the Board of Equalization and Appeals will be meeting. But right now, the numbers would suggest that there might be what I would describe as kind of a nominal increase in property tax collections for next year based on our historical collection percentage and kind of where the assessed value stands now. But that's when I say nominal, I'm talking in terms of a couple of $100,000 maybe. Yeah. So not a lot, but certainly steady.
Yeah, I think we'll have to monitor that as well as the appeals, property tax appeals roll in. We may see we may see some movement in that number that I know that changes every day, but we may see some more significant movement than we typically see on that, based off of, some evaluations from the prior year.
Hey, Paul, looking at the budget calendar, I know we've still got a lot of moving parts. We've had, if I'm looking at the most updated one, we've had the work sessions, but then is this correct, on April 29th, that would be an agenda review meeting. That may get pushed out just depending on how soon we get information, right?
That's right. Yeah. I mean, we've been waiting. We were hopeful. We find ourselves kind of in a similar situation that we were last year, getting information, kind of later than we would prefer. But we're kind of at the pace of the federal government as far as kind of buttoning all of this together. And so, yes, I think what you'll see is once we get that guidance, hopefully next week, then we can make some decisions. The mayor can make some decisions on how he wants to propose the usage of those funds. And then we can have the council weigh in on that proposal in the next couple of weeks. I know we've got down, I'm skipping way ahead, but we're scheduled to be May the 13th for our next meeting. And so what I'd like to do is have somewhat have a 95% proposed budget by that May 13th date that we can run through, and really get a grasp of it, make any recommendations if there's a need for any financing or to fund this or to fund that. We can make those recommendations in early May. That gives Mr. Arnold a couple of weeks to kind of compile and be ready to present in June. Does that sound like a feasible plan, Mr. Arnold?
Yes, that's right now, from my priorities, or where I see I need to focus my time right now, would be we've got a good compilation of the cost side of next year's budget right now, and we need to work on revenues, and hopefully what you outlined there will work just fine. That's my plan.
Okay. So Ross, to answer your question, yeah, I would see that sliding a week or two. We are a week or two behind schedule on this, and that's due to the closure of our books and some projections that have kind of trickled through the process. We're getting better, and I'm hopeful, next year we'll continue to attack this timeline and just continue to modify it as need be to make sure that I would say that the council's ahead of the game from where we typically are in getting this, the first week of June. So, we just need to continue to monitor it and kind of do our best to keep to that as we can. Any other discussion on our budget calendar and the process that Mr. Arnold and I have kind of laid out? All right. If not, we'll move on to item 4B. As many of you are aware, we had two reports over the last quarter. One from the comptroller's office, another from Mr. Crone, an attorney that the city hired to look into some financial situations within the city. Both of those had some identified some deficiencies in processes. Ms. McKinney, our internal auditor, has been reviewing those reports as well as some of our processes. She and I met earlier this week, and she's had about a month to really look at those. She's had a chance to meet with some of the departments that could potentially be impacted by some of these corrective actions. Ms. McKinney, could you just give us a quick update on kind of where you are on that corrective action development?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. As you stated, in response to the comptroller and the Crone's report, I started a review of the purchasing department and the current processes that are already in place. I have identified some areas and made some recommendations where we can strengthen some of those policies. I am packaging those up to present to the mayor and the budget committee for review and discussion. Hopefully we can implement some of the recommendations this coming up fiscal year. So we are actively working in that area to just make sure that we make some positive changes to prevent any future occurrences.
Excellent. So I think here within the next week or so, we'll have a meeting with the mayor, kind of solidify some of those suggestions, bring that back for our May meeting with the budget committee, have some discussion about that, and hopefully make a recommendation to the city council or to the mayor's office in our June meeting for the June city council meeting for the implementation of some of these corrective actions. That kind of rolls us into item C, which is our FY22 audit plan. As all of you know, we've taken on the responsibility of an audit committee for the city, and one of the roles that we have is to work alongside Ms. McKinney in developing an audit plan. She and I had a brief discussion about this earlier this week, and one of the things that we talked about was identifying some areas that we could continue to monitor. I know that she's already done that and is kind of ahead of the game on that as far as some of the areas that have popped up that she's looking at. But we'll continue. We'd like to kind of formalize that, lay it out with a schedule, whether that's quarterly or monthly monitoring. And if there's other areas, potential areas that we need to look at and make sure we're shoring up, we can identify those in that plan and lay that out for the coming year. Ms. McKinney, is there anything else you could expand on that?
Absolutely. I think one of the key areas that we definitely want to have on our schedule is the fiscal operations of the new waste management contract. We want to make sure that we include that and review the processes to make sure that we're adhering to the contract specifications early on, just get ahead of that. And also, I'm working to survey different areas to look for any common fiscal issues that our departments may be experiencing so that we can get in front of it and just offer training and support and redirection if needed. So it'll be a fluid plan, of course, because we know we have so much going on, but we're going to present a more structured plan as far as audit review for the upcoming year for you guys to take a look at.
Thank you, Ms. McKinney. Any questions from the group for either item B or C? And this will be an ongoing process, as she just alluded to. You know, it's a fluid process. Things pop up throughout the year that she has to look at. But you know, establishing some structure, and if there are commonalities, you know, be it cash control or you know, the way that we log in and out of computers, those types of things that she can look at, and if it's more of a global situation that she needs to address, then we can provide that training and do our best to make sure that, you know, we're being accountable, holding people accountable, and providing the proper training to keep people out of trouble. That concludes the items that I had on the agenda for today. Again, a lot of this is kind of in motion and is in the process of working through it. Right now, we have our next regularly scheduled time to be the second Thursday of the month. That would be May the 13th. It's my understanding that we need to start moving back to, we talked about this last month, moving back to in-person meetings. So I would imagine that May the 13th would be our first in-person meeting back. We'll do our best to, we'll probably get in the Ben Langford room on the 13th. So we've got, you know, space to spread out. We're not all on top of each other. But that's kind of how I would see that go. That gives Mr. Arnold, you know, three and a half weeks to to compile this and the mayor to review the proposals that he's got and present us a proposed budget. Is there any other business that the committee would have today? All right. Well, sorry, I got a phone call there. If not, I would go ahead and call the meeting adjourned. I appreciate all your time, and if you got any questions, feel free to reach out. I'll continue to update the group as I receive information, especially related to the American Rescue Plan and any proposed budgets. That way we can get that in front of you, and you guys have enough time to review. All right, everybody. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.